Let's go straight to my next guest. She's a former Labour MP. She's now sitting as an independent MP, Rosie Duffield. A very good morning to you, Rosie.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Now, a couple of big stories I want to get your thoughts on. In particular, we'll start with the chaos and plotting in number 10 Downing Street that we've seen. Now, bearing in mind that it was just over a year ago that you resigned the Labour whip, you decided to sit as an independent, and in your resignation letter, you talked about Keir Starmer's cruel and unnecessary policies, sleaze, nepotism, apparent avarice and hypocrisy over his acceptance of all those gifts, the freebie football tickets and the Lord Alley suits and glasses. So let's establish you're not Keir Starmer's biggest fan.
No.
What do you make of the plots and allegations that have emerged over the last couple of days?
I mean, look, the truth is I can say what my Labour colleagues can't say, and we've never been madly in love with Keir or his leadership. And I think the plan initially was to kind of get over the sort of Boris Johnson, success, and to just have a candidate that wasn't a leader that wasn't Jeremy Corbyn, because he'd done so badly on the doorsteps. And then we were going to find out when an election would be and see what we were going to do. I don't think anyone really imagined Keir as the next Prime Minister, if I'm honest. If you look how terribly badly we did as a party in the Hartlepool by-election, there was absolute outrage about how badly we did compared to the government, who weren't that popular at the time, and people have been talking about getting rid of him since then. Obviously then we had this huge election success, but nobody that I know, none of the older MPs and veteran MPs, ever imagined he would go 5 years after an election. I'm just being absolutely honest.
No, that's true. It was fascinating, though. In July 24, after the election, the usual pundits were saying, the same ones who said that Boris Johnson in 2019 was going to last 10 years, the same ones who said that Labour Party were over, they were saying he's going to be in office for 10 years. Now it looks like he'll struggle to hit 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, no Prime Minister can survive the last terrible May election results, that one in Caerphilly, all of the scandals, all of the U-turns, all of the internal squabbles, and then May's, the local elections, which are set to be dire. So there's no way that he can survive all of those things.
Well, there's now talk whether he can even survive the budget, which is what we think that this plotting has been about, and there's talk about an imminent threat from whether it's Wes Streeting or someone else. But here's the thing. Is there anybody else who is more competent and more appealing to the public, who also would get elected by the Labour Party membership? Because Wes Streeting comes across to an awful lot of people in the mainstream. It's like, he seems pretty sensible. I mean, I'm very angry. I'm not happy about his pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel stance, but and I don't think he's done. We'll come on to the trans thing, an issue, but I don't think he's done well on that front, having made a promising start. So, but he hasn't got a chance in hell of getting elected on Labour Party membership because he's seen as Blairite. And let's face it, they're all still Corbynistas.
True. And I think there are two questions. Is this just a Prime Minister for now? Because as one of my very senior colleagues said to me, before July had even ended in 2024, this is the last Labour government for a generation. So are we just limping to the next general election, and it looks poll-wise as though that's what the party will be doing? Or are we really hoping for someone who can try and rebuild and re-establish this party and win the next election? And those are possibly two very different candidates.
What about the prospect of, if there were a leadership election, and the new leader was elected, whether it was, God forbid, Ed Miliband or someone else, that actually anything would really change enough? Because at the end of the day, if you've got, and Henry Hirse, he's deputy editor of Conservative Home, but he's had to watch the Conservatives basically, drive themselves into the ground. Nothing's going to change in terms of, the economic realities of where we are. Nothing's going to change when it comes to Labour backbenchers being unwilling to vote for any welfare reform. And I know one of the things you resigned about was you didn't want some of that welfare reform. I think you are wrong on that. But nothing's going to change. The numbers ain't going to change other than going more wrong.
No, you're right. I mean, I don't think there's anything now, if I'm absolutely honest, and I can be, that Labour can do to save themselves. I think there's been so much economic distrust and all these U-turns. What are Labour for? And one of the reasons I was a Labour MP and not a Conservative MP is because we've always argued against that two-child limit and those kinds of austerity measures. If I'd wanted those, I'd have been a Conservative, or even nowadays possibly Reform MP. But I'm not. I was a Labour MP. And when you vote vote Labour and you are a Labour MP, you want Labour to actually be Labour. And at the moment, I'm not sure anyone knows what they're for. They're trying to sort of chase reform because they've had a bit of an eye on the polls, but that never works. Reform or reform, So Labour have got to provide an alternative, or the Greens are going to eat up the left vote.
But what is that alternative when people have got sky-high taxes, welfare spending is ballooning, threatening to get even worse, the debt is ballooning, the cost of the debt is ballooning, and again, threatening to get even worse? What is the Labour alternative? Because the only alternative, if anyone can do maths, is you've got to cut spending.
Yeah, true. I mean, it looks as though we don't have any choices at the moment. If you're going to have to do that, it looks like Rachel Reeves is going to have to do that, at least frame it in a way that the Labour Party will understand and accept. Make it with a view to stopping some of these cuts that people can't stand in a while. Explain why you're doing that. They haven't done that at all. They've just come in and to cut the winter fuel allowance
it was insane.
Straight away. I mean, why do that? So I think she alienated everyone. I think possibly that the winter fuel allowance was the first and last nail in their coffin, if I'm
Absolutely.
honest.
But on the two-child benefit cap, again, you resigned over that. I did think the £5 billion in welfare cuts, it wasn't even going to cut the budget. It was going to make it not grow at quite the same amount. So it wasn't even a proper cut. And cutting the amount that people who are disabled get is not what we should be doing. We should be cutting the number of people who are eligible, particularly for minor ailments, minor anxiety and depression, to not work. And we've seen the idea that we have, a million more people in the last year who were able to claim these benefits, universal credit for benefits, and never actually be required to even look for work because of their various largely mental health problems. It frankly is a joke, and it's a joke on the British taxpayer. Now, every Labour MP claiming to be, used to be the party of the working class, should absolutely be supporting getting those people off welfare and into work, and making sure that their working class voters don't have to pay tax to have someone living next door swinging the lead. But also on the two-child benefit cap, there are Labour voters who are going, I can't afford to have one kid, two kids, three kids, because I'm paying so much tax to support other people who are on welfare. If you want to have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids, get a job to pay for them, would be what they would say, same as me. Absolutely. That's not a right-wing view. So why would you want to scrap the two-child benefit cap?
No, I agree with that. And I think, look, we need to drill down a bit more into that. I mean, people claiming that they've got anxiety for several years, without a proper mental health service that's funded throughout the country, those people can't get help, can't get themselves back to work. They're crippled by some of the things that were caused by lockdown, young people not even back into education yet, this group called NEETs. I think we need to look at all of these things instead of just papering over them. And you're right, the two-child limit is a really contested thing. The thing I hate about it the most was what was called the rape clause. So if you are attacked or raped and have a third child, you've got to declare that. You've got to absolutely humiliate and embarrass yourself, tell a load of strangers that that's what's happened to you, and your child will then be stigmatised. So I think there are elements of that are dire.
I'm sorry, I don't think that's the excuse for spending billions more pounds of taxpayers' money because someone in a document has to say, I didn't actually want to have this child. I mean, maybe we should get those women out of a situation where they're being raped. Maybe they should have abortions. They might not for religious reasons. That's not that. Yeah. I mean, I honestly, I think that's a cop-out, to be honest with you, Rosie.
No, fair enough, but that is why I was a Labour MP. We believe in welfare. The Tories and Reform.
You shouldn't believe in welfare. You should believe in a safety net, not welfare.
I think there's something in between there, isn't there? I mean, I think we'd find a way of agreeing.
I believe in from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That's Karl Marx, I believe. But that's fundamental. Right. I think that a Labour MP, as you were, Labour Party, should be representing working people and not welfare.
I absolutely agree, but there are some families that do work two or three jobs and still can't afford to live. And look at the fact that wages are really low.
This is again a nonsense. You're talking about dad working 2 days a week and there's a mum working a few hours somewhere. So you're not talking about two parents working full time like lots of other families do, and then not being able to. When we talk about the working poor on welfare, they are not parents working full time. End of.
I do know people that do that, and I worked in a school in a really deprived bit of Canterbury, because believe it or not, there are deprived bits of Canterbury, and there were parents working incredibly hard, and they themselves were peed off when they saw what they thought were 12 child families getting benefits. So we need to get it right, and I think just scrapping it for more than two children isn't it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And
but none of those children had to be born since that 2 years after the policy was announced. People had to, you've got a choice. There are millions of parents making a choice every single day not to have another child because they can't afford it, because they're paying so much tax, because they're paying for people who are not making the right choices. Let me ask you about the BBC there, because you've been a fantastic campaigner for women's rights, girls' rights. Not anti-trans, just pro-women's rights and safety. What did you make of the BBC boss who, I mean, this blew my mind. He's the corporation's director of news content, Richard Burgess. Yesterday he told journalists in an all-staff call that they must cover the gender debate impartially, and this is going to blow your mind, consider the views of both sides.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us are really surprised, are we, that this has been going on? You know, when I did get onto Women's Hour, they sort of were trying to get me on for ages, and I knew it would be very, very hostile. And it was at the peak of all of this, sort of 2021-ish, I think.
I'm surprised they even invited you on.
Oh, Emma Barnett was, you know, a bit of an attack dog, but she's very good at her job. And obviously the sort of lens that the BBC looked at this is all through trans rights, not women's rights. And I think that's the culture that needs to change.
Well, absolutely. And again, I mean, if in doubt, put a drag queen on. I mean, that seems to be the answer. But do you think things are changing? Because we've had that ruling from the Supreme Court, April. We've still got, I mean, you know, men who claim they're women or dress up as women being allowed to go into the women's toilets in Parliament, for goodness sake. We've still got men being held behind bars in women's prisons. This is still going. We've still got nurses in NHS hospitals at tribunals saying, I don't want a doctor who claims he's a woman to be standing watching me in my bra and knickers when I get changed. It's still happening. Nothing's changed, has it? I mean, Piers Morgan's written a book saying woke is dead. Well, yeah, good luck with that.
But that's where we go back to working women, because women in Parliament are very privileged, and, you know, people like us can talk about trans rights and be all inclusive and lovely, but when you are a nurse or a teaching assistant or someone who needs to change for work, you do need that dignity and privacy. And people like us, our job is to make sure that you do get that through the law. You mentioned women in prisons. My colleague Rebecca Paul raised that in Prime Minister's questions, and Down's view as a prison in her constituency. We've both been told in the chamber often that there are no men in women's prisons, but we know that there are. She's been there, she's seen them, she knows those staff. So that is something that hasn't quite filtered through yet. So we have these sort of middle class commentators who are all about inclusion, and the reality filters right the way down to women in prisons and women in working class jobs.
Absolutely. Rosie Duffield, so good to talk to you, independent, former Labour MP Rosie Duffield. There. Quick response from Henry Hill.
I mean, on the problem with the prisons, of course, is that we've got no spaces. So where are you going to move these handful of prisoners to?
To men's prisons.
Well, yeah, but exactly. But there's no. But you need to release some people. That's the prisons are a hideous mess. The thing that struck me about the BBC is that it's a lot of the problem is actually down to a restructure they did. There's now specialist desks. So previously every show would have a reporter who just covers stuff, and understandably your trans desk gets full of people with a view on that issue.
Who have an obsession with that.
Exactly, and that I think is the problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, again, you know, let's face it, like the climate change correspondents, whoa, yeah, you are absolutely crazy to actually say this is all a load of nonsense because you're off jetting away to Brazil for a conference, having a great time. Shh, keep strum, keep up the lifestyle. 11:40.